53 years ago, on the 1st of October 1960, Nigeria broke free from the shackles of colonialism and gained her independence. Britain's rule in Africa's most populous nation had come to an end. Welcome to Global Perspectives. My name is Kingsley Antwi-Boasiako. And today we're going to be talking about Nigeria's state of affairs after 53 years of independence. And with me in the studio to help do the discussion, Dr. Brandon Kandama, Assistant Professor of Political Science and a member of OU African Studies Program. Nancy Ketu, a doctoral student in the School of Media Arts. We share similar fate, from Nigeria. And my good friend Opia Cletus Oji, a master's student in Information and Telecommunication Systems, also from Nigeria. Welcome to Global Perspectives.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Nancy, there's a tradition on this show that we usually start with ladies first, so I'm going to be starting with you. I would want you to tell us about Nigeria as you know it. Describe Nigeria to us. What is Nigeria to you?
Well, like you said in the introduction, Nigeria, we call it, I don't know if it's self-called, but the giant of Africa. But in terms of our population, currently we're about 160 million people, so that is pretty large. We're a very diverse and rich culture with a very rich cultural heritage. So we have over 250 ethnic nationalities, so we like to call ourselves. Nigeria is just full of wonderful people, very industrious, very hardworking, fun-loving people. And that is the Nigeria I know, just a very wonderful country that is, with people who are striving to just make the best out of their lives. Some time ago, I heard we were called one of the happiest countries in the world. I don't know how that comes in, but I also know that we're a very religious country in terms of faith. Our people are very religious. We take things easy in the way we do things, and that is just the beauty of what makes us. So we're just a united force, but it diverse in so many ways.
Wow, that's a beautiful Nigeria you just painted to us. Thank you so much. Oji, you're also from Nigeria. Tell us about the Nigeria that you know, the Nigeria where you are from. Tell us about it.
Okay, Nigeria, politically, Nigeria is divided into 6 geopolitical regions. And we have the southern region, we have the south-south region, we have the northeast region, southwest region, eastern Nigeria, and the other regions, actually. And when it comes to political appointments when it comes to political appointments in Nigeria, just like they call it the national role, these regions are considered in every appointment when it comes to government, And my country, Nigeria, just like as Nancy has said, is a very diverse country in terms of tribal groups and ethnicity. So, and it's also the biggest, the largest country the country with the largest population in Africa, and one of the largest country in Western Africa. Nigeria is a big brother for the whole of Africa. Sure. That's all I can say.
I mean, you can't talk about Nigeria without saying it's the big brother of Africa. So thanks for letting us know that. Dr. Kandama, I'm going to borrow one of my favorite professors' phrase and pose this question to you: that where does Nigeria and your story intersect? I mean, I know you've done lots of extensive studies, when it comes to Western Africa. I mean, and especially as in reference to Nigeria. I know you speak fluent Hausa, so tell us where Nigeria and your story intersect.
Well, Kingsley, I've been doing research on Nigeria for a little over a decade now. I started working on it as a graduate student at the University of Wisconsin. Fluent is probably a bit of an exaggeration, but I do enjoy having every opportunity I can to work on my Hausa. And I've had the opportunity to travel back and forth fairly regularly from northern Nigeria for the most part since 2007, where I was a Fulbright scholar in Sokoto at Usmanu Danfodio University. And I was most recently in Nigeria over the summer, actually doing research on this question of ethnic balancing and how Nigeria is one of Africa's relatively few federal systems. Nigeria is one of the few countries in Africa that has a state system system that looks somewhat similar to the United States,
Sure.
36 states in the Federal Capital Territory. Trying to understand how a federal society uses these units to balance ethnic appointments in government, ethnic appointments in the civil service. So I really enjoy Nigeria. I love to travel back whenever I can. But as I think you know, right, the situation, especially in northern Nigeria, the part of the country that I know the best, has deteriorated, sadly, rather quite a bit over the last 4 or 5 years. And increasingly, some of my favorite places are not places where it's particularly safe to travel anymore.
Too bad, yeah. Well, I mean, and it's good you mentioned northern Nigeria because we're going to come to that in a bit. But I would want us to talk about, you recently celebrated your Independence Day celebration, and I would want us to look at the state of affairs in Nigeria after this 53 years of independence. What have been some of the achievements that Nigeria as a country has chalked over these years, Nancy?
I look at us as a growing democracy, knowing that for quite a bit in terms of our existence as a nation, we've been under military rule. So I think just looking at Nigeria between 1999 and now in terms of how the democracy is evolving and is growing, I mean, there are still massive problems, when it comes to that. But just looking at how we're able to go through this process and be where we are, it's one big achievement. For the first time, we've not had the military come in at any point during this regime to topple the government like we've had, since 1960. So I think one of the major achievements I look at for this country is in terms of that politically, and in terms of Nigeria being a global player, economy, politics, and all that. The role that Nigeria has played in Africa, in Sierra Leone, in Liberia, in South Africa,
in Mali recently,
leading ECOMOG, the peace troops, and just trying to, bring kind of peace and restore some sense of dignity in some areas in Africa. In sports, we're all over the place. We're all over the place. We definitely, when you don't talk of sports, football, for example, without really talking about Nigeria. In arts and in culture, we're all over the place. Nigeria music is all over the place. Literature, when you look at literature globally, you look at Nigeria. So as a people and as a nation, I would say that, 53 years, yes, we could have been better than where we are. I mean, but looking back, so far, so good.
So far, so good. Oji, tell us how you see Nigeria's achievement over this period of years after independence.
Yeah, from my own perspective, as someone who has been in Nigeria since birth, I think the country has made significant progresses. Definitely not in all sectors, but we've made progress, especially in the telecom sector, and we've also made progress slightly in the power sector. Yeah, from 2001, after the introduction of democracy back again in Nigeria in 1999, the government of Nigeria was able to privatize the telecom industry, opening up to liberalization and opening up to competitions, and significantly it has led to the boom of telecom industries in Nigeria, especially in Africa. Nigeria comes first, and when it comes to world rating too, Nigeria is also one of the fastest growing telecom industry in the world after India. So you can't talk about development in Nigeria over the past 53 years without talking about the telecom industry. Also, we've not really made significant progress in power, but it has been an upward tide for the past 2 years, if I can recall very well. Recently, even the power sector was privatized, and there were mergers and sales opening up to competitions to private entities for distribution, production, and from my report back home, the power sector has really improved. So I would say we've made progress. In agriculture too, we've made progress. But there's been a downfall of that aspect, especially when it comes to the northern Nigeria, because of the unrest going on there. Well, it's been good so far.
Yeah, I would ask you to hold on the northern situation.
Okay.
We're going to get back to it in a little bit.
Okay.
But Dr. Kandaba, Nancy mentioned something which I thought was very important, as in Nigeria's role in Africa and even globally. And I know that you in the political science, especially African politics and all that. Could you shed more light on Nigeria's role, the role Nigeria plays, let's say in Western Africa, and then you relate it to, is it a global?
Sure, Kingsley. Nigeria is obviously, its size alone makes it a really significant player in regional politics. But of course, Nigeria has, for a long time, going back in many ways to the military regimes in the 1980s, really had its eye on being a regionally recognized powerhouse. It's devoted a lot of time and effort and energy, financial resources in particular, into having a presence across Africa, to being at the forefront of various efforts to provide peacekeeping troops, to be at the leadership, to be in the leadership aspect of those sorts of efforts. Now it's been up and down, right? Nigeria's wealth, in many ways its power, derived from its global position in the oil sector. And Nigeria has been for a long time about the 6th biggest producer of oil in the world. But that's been a difficult industry in the last 3 or 4 years. Prices have been very volatile, and of course the revelations over the last several years that the sector is even more riddled with corruption than it looked like it was previously. The protests that were associated with those revelations have really in a lot of ways undermined some of that progress. And of course the uncertainty relating to Nigerians' political leadership. And here I hate again to be the negative one because I'm also quite optimistic about Nigeria. But the uncertainty going forward with Nigeria's political leadership, particularly the role of Goodluck Jonathan, the current president who's considering running for another term, which he's constitutionally allowed to have in 2015. His international presence or his international reputation has not always been particularly stellar. There was a sort of embarrassing situation that happened at the AU meeting over the summer where he was not present to give his speech. And the uncertainty relating to his position, his tenuous status within his political party, they do undermine Nigeria's ability to project that power. Right? Nigeria's instability, particularly in the northern region, which you mentioned we'll talk about earlier, and the connections between that instability and broader instability in Mali and in Niger do sometimes undermine Nigeria's ability to take on that role, to sort of seize the reins as a giant in West Africa. And so it's a mixed bag with respect to its success in that way.
That's thanks for sharing with us. Nancy, Dr. Kandama talked about let's say the oil sector, which I would consider some of the potentials of Nigeria. I watched a clip some time ago where former President Obasanjo asked, the BBC interviewer to describe Nigeria as a potentially rich country. So let's talk about the potentials of Nigeria. What do you think are some of the potentials that could really help propel Nigeria to the level of development that we all look for? What are some of the potentials that are in Nigeria?
I think you can't move away from talking about oil in terms of what we have. The gas deposits that we have still have a lot of untapped natural resources. I would look at the oil as a blessing and as a curse. If you look at it within the context of the oil curse and what happens when you find that natural resource within kind of an environment, and that is what Nigeria is going through. So we have, like Oji mentioned a few minutes ago, what we had in Nigeria before oil was agriculture. And when you look at, within the context of Nigeria, northern Nigeria produced groundnuts and cotton. The western Nigeria had cocoa, which, was exported in large volumes. And the east, where Oji comes from, had palm oil, had coal, and so many things. And by the time we discovered oil, investment in that sector began to dwindle. And so the focus now the focus has been on petroleum. And that has been kind of the source of income and revenue for most of the states, and which is problematic in itself. Because what I see happening is that most states and regions have not been able to develop their economy, kind of tap on the natural resources they have. Because every month, every state waits for the allocation at the center, for them to come. And that itself has created problems, especially from the Niger Delta. Now, if you look at the Niger Delta, where the bulk of the oil comes from, it's a region that is very poor, no schools, no hospitals, and because of the oil spills you have on, the area, people find it difficult to farm. Most of them are fishermen, and you have oil spills in the water, so they cannot, their source of livelihood, in a sense, has been eroded due to, this. So they have wealth within their community, but yet, it's not kind of impacted on them. So that creates another dynamic, because some of the first kind of major violence we had was from the Niger Delta, through the Niger Delta militants, and the agitation, you know, for them to get, rather than 13% derivation that they're having now, they were demanding for 50%. So we want 50% of the revenue that comes from this area to go back to us. Yeah. You know, that created problems, which even though it's kind of seems it is settled, you know, it's still there, because at any point there are always threats that they would go back. So on one hand, you know, the oil has been good, but the other hand, it also created room for corruption. Which, you know, we really have to be, you know, frank when we talk about Nigeria and the oil. Yeah. Because one of the major issues we have is the corruption in the oil industry. In 2000 and Occupy movement, 2011, January, when the Jonathan decided to kind of announce that he was withdrawing subsidy, even though interestingly every year they withdraw the subsidy. But every year we still have the same rhetoric going on. So, you know, what happened was that kind of brought, you know, shed light into what was happening. Nigerians demanded accountability from the oil sector. And what Ribadu committee now discovered is almost daily, you know, about 25 million liters of oil cannot be accounted for every day, and that has been going on. So, a blessing and a curse on one hand. But I look at, if you have visionary leaders who look at the other opportunities we have. I come from Plateau State. We have columbite, still untapped. We have precious stones, still untapped. The industry, we don't even have an industry that looks at those possibilities. We have cash crops. We still have coffee. We have cocoa. We have, you know, groundnuts. We have so many things that could be packaged and exported. But this area has not yet, you know, kind of been tapped because everybody is looking at the oil. Maybe one day when the oil wells are dry, we'll begin to look at other things. Yeah,
I mean, I could, from what you just said, I could really see the issue of the resource curse, I mean, come into play here. And Oji, I'm still going to take you back to the issue of the potentials in Nigeria. I mean, Nancy has spoken extensively about it. In your view, you're also from Nigeria. What do you think are some of the potentials? What do you think are some of the, you know, the things that can really aid Nigeria to the height that we all look up to, we all expect it to be?
Okay. Nigeria planned or intends to maximize the potentials in the petroleum industry. With this planning, the government of Nigeria set up the petroleum ministry. Thereafter, they set up some other bodies like the NDDC, the Niger Delta Development Commission, and also created a regulation in the constitution giving the oil producing state 13% derivative from the oils in Nigeria. These plans or these things were set up to make sure that part of the resources that comes out from the oil producing state goes back to the oil producing state, especially when it comes to the dilapidation of natural resources there and the impoverization of the people, because most of the resources gotten from there are not reinvested in those places. So these bodies were set up, the Petroleum Ministry were set up to make sure that enough planning is done, giving the people in the Niger Delta region and other oil producing states opportunities for growth. And employment organizations were also set up through the resources of the petroleum industries to create job opportunities for the youths in Nigeria, especially in the oil-producing regions. And it's been like that. Even scholarships were also introduced. We have the NDDC scholarships also. We have other youths and sports organizations being set up through petroleum industries to open up the people of the Niger Delta and oil-producing regions to opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely tell there are countless potentials, but I would want us to delve into, you know, the ugly aspect of, you know, Nigeria, as I hate to call it. But what is, Dr. Kandaman, I would want you to comment on this. What is happening in the northeastern part of Nigeria with reference to this Boko Haram activities and all that? What is happening?
Well, if you really want to understand the sort of current situation of unrest in northeastern Nigeria, it's really important to step back and think about some of the positive aspects, right, that we've been talking about with respect to Nigeria's development potential. Hey, if you look at the way that Nigeria has pursued its development agenda over the last 25 or 30 years, there is this very real sense that either because of the petroleum or because of sort of a broader sort of centralized state control environment, everyone really expects resources to flow from the top to the bottom.
Yeah.
Even the comments my colleague is making, right? Most of the kinds of development projects that people imagine working for Nigeria really sort of start at the top. They start with this money that's coming from oil, and they trickle down through government bureaucracies and political appointees, and eventually maybe small amounts of it arrive sort of at the bottom, just maybe. Right? And this idea that things sort of come from the top down really sort of pervades a big part of Nigerian culture. And as a result, I think you've seen really dramatically growing inequality across the country, certainly between the north and the south. You know, the northeastern part of Nigeria is realistically probably the poorest part of the country. And there are specific historical reasons why that's the case, not all of which are the fault of the other parts of the country. But there's this real sort of cultural difference between the folks who live in Lagos and Abuja, which are two of the most expensive cities to live in the world, who have access to, you know, sort of red carpet events and who are covered in this sort of tabloid journalism in Lagos where you see pictures of starlets and, you know, people who are walking the red carpet, and then the reality of everyone else's lives in Nigeria. That kind of inequality poses real political dangers to a society. Now, if you look at the statistics, in fact, Nigeria and the United States are about the same level of inequality, which is itself sort of scary when you think about that for American politics. But that inequality has palpable political consequences. And I think that the best way to understand this Boko Haram and the religiously motivated violence that you see in northeastern Nigeria is to think about it in terms of this growing chasm between folks in Nigeria who live in the rural regions, who are looking for any sort of solution that's available to them, whether it's religious revival or sort of directly seizing access to state resources, and then the elites, the ones who really have those sort of vehicles out.
Okay. All right, Nancy, you just had Dr. Kana. Do you? I mean, you're from Nigeria. Do you also share the same sentiments as in what brought about this, you know, Boko Haram thing and all this, you know, things going on in the northeastern part of Nigeria? Is that a similar thing that you share?
Yeah, he kind of hits, you know, the point, you know, when you talk about this growing difference between the rich and the poor. And so what you have in the country, especially in that region, is marginalization, discrimination. Constitutionally, we have a problem. Who, you know, when we define who a citizen of Nigeria is and when we define who an indigene, you know, so you can be a citizen of Nigeria, but you can't be an indigene of a state even if you were born there. You know, it's kind of fuzzy.
For our American viewers, this is a really odd system, right? I know. The idea that there's sort of legal citizenship both at the federal level and the state level, and that no matter how long you live in a state, no matter how long your family is there, if that's not your ethnic origin, you can never become a citizen of that state. You will always be a second-class citizen.
So, you know, when you talk about the problem in northern Nigeria, you know, look at the problem in Plateau State. Because some of the major conflicts, violent conflicts we've had in Plateau State from 2001 and to this point, you know, it's still kind of the same problem. In Plateau State, for example, in Jos North local government, you have a very growing population of people, somehow are called settlers, you know, but mostly from the Muslim, you know, they are Muslims. So they kind of dominate that area. So gradually you have an influx of people who have moved to Plateau State, running away from conflict in Bauchi, from Kaduna and other areas, and kind of found some sense of stability in Plateau State. But another problem emerged in Plateau State, and that is because the indigenes, you know, kind of felt threatened with the settlers. Now, if you look at these complications, you won't really make sense of it. But it still boils down to marginalization, economic marginalization, political marginalization, and a sense of me being a Nigerian, yet I'm not entitled simply because I don't come from a state. So I can't aspire into leadership. You know, I can't get scholarships. I can't get, simply these are the kind of things you find. So you move on to, you know, Borno, Yobe State, like he talks about, is simply the same kind of problem. But one other thing I kind of see in that area was, you know, why did this problem emerge during the political period? You understand? And I look at politics playing a very, very big role in it. For example, some of the Boko Haram members that were arrested some years ago, first of all, pointed to the fact that they began as political thugs who were used by the government or politicians who got into power and then abandoned them. And gradually, while they were in power, still used them as thugs. And eventually, they came in contact with this group, you know, who, for some religious reason, you know, are dealing with the, you know, are kind of trying to make a point. Somehow you have a combination of all kinds of things happening. But the killing of the leader of the Boko Haram sect by the police, and then kind of the attack on the sect and all that, kind of spiraled the problem out of control. But if you look, underneath, for me, I always look at this conflict as more economic, more political. Even when people try to give it some religious coloration, I still look at the underlying causes, and these are the realities of what we're dealing with.
Yeah, so obviously the situation is more complex than, we think it is. When people make it look like it's a religious thing, these are all the undertones, as you and Dr. Kandama have already shared. So thanks. Oji, definitely, when we talk about the activities in the north and some of these terrorist activities, one might think that it wouldn't really affect people in the southern part, because it's not really going on there. But I would want to ask you that, how do you think this affects, Nigeria in general? Whether you're from the north or you're from the south, and from the youth perspective and all that, how do you really see the activities, these terrorist activities, and the toll it's having on Nigeria in its entirety?
Okay, the upheaval in the northern part of Nigeria really has a problem even down southern Nigeria. For example, in Kano is a metropolitan city in Nigeria, comprised of both people from the eastern part of Nigeria, people from the western part of Nigeria. They kind of have almost, especially the eastern and the southern part of Nigeria, have almost equal population in Kano. Some people have even said the Yorubas are even more in Kano than even the Hausas in Kano. You see, and sometimes these attacks get to the southern people, the southern and the eastern people in Kano, and invariably affects the people by the loss of lives, people from the southern and the eastern part of Nigeria that are based in Kano. We would also talk about people in Kaduna too. The Igbos are very much in Kaduna. The Igbos are from the eastern part of Nigeria. They're very much in Kaduna. And the auto industry there, the spare part business there, motor industries there, the Igbos are in charge of it. And recently there have been massive attacks on those people from the eastern part of Nigeria. When it comes to transportation in Nigeria, you find out that the eastern people of Nigeria are very, very much involved, and they transport people from both the south and the north, and they've always been attacked. So it boils down that this problem in the northern part of Nigeria still comes back to affect people.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
maybe I could just add kind of the implications of what is happening, just to tie
yeah,
it.
Unfortunately, we did not have, and we just ran out of time. Like I told my producers, you just cannot talk about Nigeria, within this space of time, But definitely, we're going to make,